Hi, welcome to The Reluctant Patient. In this episode, episode 5, we'll be discussing difficult emotions and the liminal model. To start things off, I just want to remind you of a phrase that I'm sure if you went to a major men's clinic for treatment, I'm sure you heard this phrase, which is, every man is different, every man's cancer journey is different. And that's emphasized over and over again. And it's a sensible thing to say, although you kind of get tired of hearing it. But this applies emotionally as well. And some men will be able to skate through this process. They are capable of dealing with whatever hardships they've gone through, and they get past it and they move on. And sometimes you hear them even say things like, my life has been enriched by this experience. I've learned from it, and I have a new lease on life and a deeper dedication to living life to its fullest. And that's great. That's all well and good, and I applaud any man who can get through that. But for most of us, it's more difficult than that, and a lot of times it's more difficult because the treatment path is very, very difficult and very, very hard. What we're losing is sometimes permanent and profound, and so there's a huge amount of loss there. There are all sorts of feelings that men go through in this experience: sorrow, grief, anger, a sense of impotence, frustration, a lack of empowerment comes up, a complete challenge to one's sense of identity. So you basically can have an identity crisis as well. You're still in treatment, and it may be that the treatment itself is triggering depression and triggering emotional instability. I think they call it lability in the text. So all these things can be going on, and I'm here to say that that is very normal, and it's very, very okay, and you need to know that there are lots of men who suffer through this and have to muddle through this and figure out how they're going to resolve this in their minds and in their hearts, what has happened to them and what continues to happen to them. And not to forget also existential terror. Most of us, when we get a diagnosis that this is a serious form of cancer, all of a sudden our thoughts about death come back, and these thoughts are often very challenging. I think for almost everyone, we have some fear of death, and so facing that and being kind of forced to, and saying, oh, guess what? The world has changed. I'm not going to live to 85 with a thoroughly healthy existence. I'm going through complications here, and it's changing my life and maybe my lifespan, and so I have to think about these things. These things are terrible, and it's a lot to get through. I want to encourage you, if you're having a difficult time, if you just really, really feel like the emotional stuff is just too high, too revved up, if you don't feel like you're able to control yourself emotionally, especially if you feel ideation of suicide or self-harm in any sort of way, or you feel depressed, and depression can just be, I think, lack of motivation. Sadness can be part of depression too, but if you're just not motivated to do anything, it's like, oh, I don't even want to go for a walk. That can be a sign of depression. So for any of those kinds of things, please go get a personal psychological therapy. You can go to a psychologist, you can go to a sex therapist, and there's some really good ones out there, by the way. Or you can even join a group. But I encourage you to get professional help. But along the way, you're going to be trying to figure it out yourself too. Professional help only goes so far, and here you are, kind of lost in this process. And so that's why I wanted to bring up how I think and how I stumbled across a way of looking at things that at least helped me understand where I was in the process, and what I was doing in that process and what I needed to do to complete that process. And so talk about that liminal space. The word liminal, if you Google it, A lot of times, I think some of the first search results will come up with liminality in architecture, which is the spaces in between functional spaces, and what you do with that liminal space, that transitional space, and how that's a concept in architecture, a principle that you do include some of that, the sort of uncertainty space, that transitional space. But you'll also read about it in anthropology, and this is the model that has been kind of inspired to a psychological model of liminality. And it started with anthropologists saying, okay, we want to figure out what ritual is about. Let's break it down. What is the purpose of ritual? Why do societies across the board have these rites of passage and these, funeral rituals, all these kinds of things? It's just consistent that if you've got humans, they do these practices. What's that about? And they came to the conclusion that people hit very, very difficult points in their lives where they're cut off from their past, where they're no longer who they were, or life does not continue the way it did before. And then they're not quite embracing the future. They're not quite figuring out how to walk forward from this experience. And so there's this in-between space, this big, fat, round, liminal space where they're just lost, and where they're feeling all sorts of emotions. They're feeling sorrow and grief and anger, and they're replaying things in their mind to understand it. And you know that if you've lost someone who you've loved, someone very deeply, is you just get into this space that's just so hard to resolve. You've been cut off from them. You no longer have contact with them. From every moment you live forward, you live that forward without them. And you drift further away from them, and they drift further away from you. And that in of itself is a form of grief. And it's just a tough thing to go through. But there's this, like I said, there's this kind of vague, amorphous space where you can just kind of suffer for a while. And that's what liminality is about. So to give you an example of how it might work and why the liminal dynamic is so useful for me, is the example I can get is waking up in the morning and you're groggy and you walk to the kitchen sink and you reach down and to fill the water bowl for the dog, and you're standing at the sink and thinking, what am I doing? The dog died last week, and here I am still filling that water bowl. And it's just this terrible moment, this poignant moment. And there's 1,000 of those. If you have a beloved pet, if you have someone in your life who you've loved, there are 1,000 different ways that hurts, and 1,000 different ways that you have to unplug yourself from those experiences. And that's true with prostate cancer too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when you look at this, you have this past with your dog. So we're going to continue with this example. You have this past with your dog, and so you're going forward without your pet, and that hurts. But what is there that you can take with you from that experience? And you have to look at that and examine that, and that's entirely yours to decide. But in that example, I can think of that something that's just so important to me, when I have a pet, is my sense of devotion to that pet. That I always fill the water bowl. That it's important for me that my pet always has fresh water. I mean, that just seems like a pet right, that they should have that. And so I do that. I do it dutifully. And my cat never gives me a high five when I do that. It's a thankless task, but by God, I do it anyway. And I've heard a lot of different pet owners say that they love their dog, or they love the cat. And one of the reasons that they love them so much is that the pet gives them unconditional love. And I almost kind of think there's a little bit of projection going on there. I think that people who own pets get to express unconditional love, and I think that for a lot of people there's a need to do that, to serve, to have a sense of duty and commitment, to an animal. If this animal is going to be in your care, then they're going to have the best care and they're going to have the best life that you can give them. You have that thing, you have that sense of duty and devotion, and it needs a home. You can take that with you. You can't bring your beloved dog with you, but you can take that with you. And most people, what will happen is so they'll have some time to grieve, and then they'll get a new pet, and so they can just kind of plug that need, that desire for devotion invest that into that new pet, and then that helps them move along. And so in this situation, you have this liminal state. You have the past, which is forever cut from you. And then you have this big middle section where you're sitting there saying, what the heck is going on? How do I deal with this? It's overwhelming. And I've got 1,000 things I have to unplug from, and 1,000 different ways that I need to save as much of this as this love and this this thing that I had as much as I can, and move it forward and find some format, some way I can move forward. And that gives me a sense of a more solid identity, and then I move on out of that little liminal space. So that's kind of the concept there. Because I love analogies and metaphors, I just think of, I just imagine your past as being a wall of drawers, and you open up that drawer and you see what you got. And some things you can't take with you, but there's some things you can take out of the drawer, and you can just you're in that liminal space of saying, okay, what do I do with this, and what do I do with that? And then eventually you figure out a way, if you can, to plug them into your life going forward. So how does it apply to prostate cancer and recovering from the damage that's done from treatment, physical damage and sexual damage that's done for treatment? And it's really bad, and I just get so tired of videos and promotional pieces saying we can fix it, and it's not going to be so bad. And we have these testimonials from very attractive people who look like hired models who say that they got through it, and it's just rarely that easy, to get through it. But how do you do this process? So I have an example, a suggestion. You're going to have to figure this out on your own, and you're going to have to come up with your own meaning, and it's really important that it comes from you. But an example I can give you, a liminal transition, for example, is a complaint that a lot of men have after having damage to their erections, having erectile dysfunction, sometimes permanent ED, is that it eliminates spontaneity from their lives. And I have that complaint, and it bothers me a lot. I mean, it's just there are just so many great memories I have of just being so filled with lust and so horny that we did it on the kitchen table because we didn't have time to bother to go upstairs and find the bed, or maybe on the stairwell with my pants to my ankles or something like that. And those are really hot memories, and it's really exciting to get in a sexual situation with your partner that you just go from 0 to 60 in just a few seconds. You just get there really, really fast. That's not my whole sex life. And I enjoy a lot of slow going, very, very, highly interactive forms of sex as well. But sometimes, that just revved up sex is just really, really special, and I don't want to lose that. So what do I do with this? It's like I can't get an erection, with a lot of planning and a lot of work. It's like, hold on, hun, let me get out a needle, and then I'm going to inject in my penis. And then I'm going to tap on my penis for about 20 minutes, and then I'm going to get an erection, and then we can have sex. And isn't that a sexy experience? And it's just like, it doesn't work, and it's frustrating, and there's no easy way to be spontaneous. And so you got to open up that drawer. And I suggest to you that anytime there's a point of pain, where you are really bummed out, really upset, I can't just do something spontaneously. I can't just let's do it and have that sense of spontaneity. If you're feeling really bad about that, then there's probably something that you need to bring with you. You need to accept that maybe that you're never ever going to get an erection on your own oomph anymore. You're always going to have to assist it in some way. You may have to accept that, but the spontaneity part, let's talk about that. You really need that. What are those components to that, and how does it break down? And so you can think about that. And so, for example, you might say, well, what's important about this? Well, quick arousal just really getting aroused very quickly is really important to me. And you might say, and I really want to challenge you with this one because so I'm confessing something about my own sexual interest, but I think it's true for most of us, which is I think the hottest, most exciting sex I've had is when my partner desired me. It's like when I can turn someone else on, that's the gold standard. That feels really good. I mean, it is hot, for me. It's not just like I feel like I'm a good person because I've got them all revved up. It feels powerful, sexually powerful, and it's a good feeling. And so you may have something like that. That's part of that component of that, fast arousal, that quickie kind of sex thing. Well, maybe you can play those out. I mean, think about these things. Maybe you want to get aroused very quickly. Well, you can. You still can get really horny. You may not have an erection, but you can still get very horny. You want to do it right there on the kitchen table, or you just get right to it. You can still do that, and you don't, if it's important for there to be penetrative sex right there, you still have some great tools. You've got a mouth, and you've got a tongue, and you've got fingers. You've got everything you need, to work with your partner and get them really revved up. And so maybe the erection part, where you get a reward of having an erection and having penetrative sex, maybe that comes a little bit later, but you still had this hot experience. So could that possibly work for you? Is that possibly a way, that you can take something that really hurts to lose and say, okay, well, let's see what I can salvage out of it. Let's open up that drawer, pick through the drawer. I've got a few things here that I really need, and I can take along if I think about it, if I can just figure out how to use it, and then I can reconstruct it into a new life that is to come. So that's the idea behind it, and I think that what it helped me understand, I think of this meme that you may have seen on the internet, of course, and Facebook and stuff, that has a picture of an illustration of the entire galaxy, with billions of stars, and there's an arrow pointing at one tiny star about 2/3 of the way out of the spoke, and it says, with a label, it says, "You are here." And I have to say that model helps me understand that I am here, and it also helps me understand that what I am doing, I am taking what I can, I am salvaging, and I am grieving every time I have to salvage something. It's like a bomb went off. It's like, let's sift through the rubble. What can I take with me? What can I take with me? And I'm going through that process. Like, I don't know. You're in a liminal space now, and you're sitting there saying, what am I? I don't even know who I am anymore. And you're taking that and saying, okay, how can I put this together into a satisfying experience? Or maybe even a joyous experience, maybe even better than satisfying. And that's a possibility with some of the things that you do when you transition back and forth. Some of the material that I read really mentioned, and I think it's worth mentioning, that when you're in that liminal space, it's a dangerous space. It's a space where you have a risk of being deeply depressed. You almost always having some form of an identity crisis when you're in that mode, and so you're a little bit at risk. You're a little bit, things can come in harm's way because you're not operating, in a full way. But it's also a time when you can be highly creative, where you can actually change yourself, where you can actually recreate yourself, and you can take an active role in that. In that process, and you can say, hey, time's a wasting, this has been my wake-up call, and I want to change direction in something that I'm doing, in a behavior or an endeavor that I'm involved in, that I want to make this change, and I just think it's a very powerful experience, and I think sometimes it takes terrible circumstances like this to affect change, to sit down and say, okay, I have to now, how can I do this in a way that's going to render the best results for me? So as you go through recovery and as you assess things, just remember, it feels bad. And it takes time. I mean, like I said, there's these treatments, there's 1,000 different cuts. There's just so many ways that this hurts you or takes away something from you. And you have to grieve those things. You have to understand what doesn't work anymore or what was taken away, to understand what you need and how to seek it and how to move that forward. And sometimes really reassess what's really important to you in that liminal space when everything's just kind of a big boiling, unformed mass of thoughts and feelings. You can just kind of work with that. So I just want to mention that you may want to look into that liminal model. There's plenty of videos online that talk about it. You have to really kind of filter through them because some of them are really focused on liminality and religion and stuff like that. So you have to focus on to find specific ones. But there are a couple that are really, really good. And as I said, it may help. If it doesn't, then keep seeking. There are many other different models out there that can provide you with emotional support. So thank you very much, and be good to yourself.